When my wife's assistant first dared to provoke me in person, I gestured for the bodyguards to drag him out. My wife, Willow, gently tried to calm me down. He's young and ignorant. Maybe just let it go. I patted the back of her hand and said, I know. Young people make mistakes. Sometimes you need to straighten them out a little and give them a warning. Otherwise they'll never learn. The next evening, my wife stormed into the room and came straight up to me. George, when you said, straighten him out, did you mean knocking out 8 teeth and breaking 6 ribs? Chapter 1. The first time I met Makoto was on an utterly ordinary Wednesday afternoon. That day, I happened to finish a meeting earlier than usual, so I drove to Willow's company to pick her up for dinner. The receptionist naturally recognized me, so I made my way up to the 16th floor without any trouble. Willow's office door was slightly ajar, and I could hear a bright laughter from inside. Seriously, you know about this too? Willow sounded pleasantly surprised. I pushed the door open and saw my wife sitting on the sofa with a young man standing beside her. He was holding a tablet, leaning slightly forward as he showed her something on the screen. Honey, Willow looked up at me with a completely unguarded smile. What brings you here? I was nearby, so I came to pick you up for dinner. Before Willow could reply, the young man spoke first. That probably won't work today. We just started reviewing the proposal for the new project. We'll be lucky if we don't end up working overtime. Willow stood up and walked over naturally, slipping her arm around mine. Oh right, let me introduce you to. This is our new assistant in the department, Makoto. Makoto, this is my husband, George. Makoto gave a respectful nod. President Wang, it's a pleasure to meet you. President Liu mentions you quite often. My eyes finally landed on him properly for the first time since entering the room. Tall and skinny, fair-skinned, gold-rimmed glasses, the refined, scholarly type. He wore a professional smile as he greeted me, calm and composed, without the slightest flaw in his manners. I came to take my wife out for dinner. Who the hell are you to say no? Even if his attitude appeared flawless, I had no intention of spoiling him. Makoto clearly hadn't expected me to be so blunt, or so harsh. He froze for a moment, embarrassment creeping across his face as it slowly turned red. All right. Seeing the atmosphere becoming awkward, Willow hurriedly stepped in to smooth things over. My husband rarely has time to pick me up. We can review the proposal tomorrow, organize the documents and head home later. After speaking to Makoto, she pulled me toward the door while talking to me. Just before the office door closed behind us, I glanced back and noticed that Makoto hadn't moved. He simply stood there staring at me, fury in his eyes, his face full of defiance. Later, I learned that Makoto was Willow's junior from the same university. He had just graduated that year, with an impressive resume and excellent interview performance, which earned him a position in the marketing department. But this reckless rookie had climbed from intern to the 16th floor in only half a year. Occasionally, I would hear Willow mention him. The company hired a pretty sharp young guy recently. He's very driven. Makoto helped me handle that difficult client today. I never said much about it. I knew Willow well. She had grown up wealthy, the only daughter in her family, and because of that, she lacked a basic sense of caution toward people. In her eyes, someone like Makoto was nothing more than a junior employee worth mentoring. But after meeting him in person today, I realized he was far from simple. I saw ambition in his eyes. He was absolutely not the type to stay in his place. Once I got that feeling, I decided that before anything could happen, I needed to crush those dangerous thoughts while they were still in the bud. What I didn't expect was that this idiot Makoto, before I even had the chance to get rid of him, actually started provoking me on purpose. Chapter 2. A few days later, there was a private gathering at my exclusive club. Most of the guests were mutual friends of ours. By the time I arrived, Willow was already entertaining the guests, while Makoto stood not too far from her side. Today, he was dressed in a perfectly tailored dark blue suit. His leather shoes were polished to a shine, and even his hair had clearly been styled with care. I noticed a gleam of metal peeking out from beneath his cuff. They were cufflinks from a luxury brand's newest seasonal collection, worth no less than 5 figures. For a freshly graduated college kid, that level of luxury was far beyond what he should have been able to afford. President Wang, seeing me enter, he proactively walked over to shake my hand, still wearing that same polished smile, as though the unpleasantness from last time had never happened. I merely grunted in response, my gaze brushing over his face before noticing that Willow had disappeared. President Liu went to the restroom. She said there would be a lot of guests tonight, so she asked me to help entertain everyone. I waved him off expressionlessly. Go do your job. But Makoto clearly had no intention of leaving. He picked up a glass of champagne and casually stood beside me, speaking in a voice low enough that only the two of us could hear. President Wang, what do you think of my outfit today? I ignored him and found a seat. He chuckled to himself and followed me over. This expensive outfit was originally a gift President Liu planned to give you, but she thought I was dressed too plainly today, so she let me wear it first. After the party, I'll return it to you. More guests were beginning to arrive, so I suppressed my irritation and replied quietly. I'm not like people like you. I don't wear clothes that someone else has already used. They feel filthy to me. After a brief pause, I added coldly, once you take them off later, I'll have the servants alter them into dog clothes. Even if I didn't want something anymore, I had no intention of letting him have it. At my words, his face shifted from green to pale with rage, his eyes practically spitting fire. I had completely stripped him of any dignity. Still, he quickly regained composure and forced another smile onto his face. You're right. Rich people like you are noble and above second-hand goods. But I'm different. I think second-hand goods are even better, more flavorful. He paused deliberately before lowering his voice. Take President Liu, for example. She's been married for years already. But that figure, that face, TSK. In fact, she's far more attractive than those younger girls. Then he looked directly at me. President Wang, you should really feel a little sense of crisis. Heh. I was so furious that I actually laughed. The smile slowly vanished from my face, my gaze turning colder and colder as I stared at him. You trying to die? Oh, I'm so scared. He crossed his arms dramatically, putting on an exaggerated frightened expression. But this is a society governed by law. I don't believe you can actually do anything to me. He finally dropped the act completely. His eyes were full of provocation, as though he truly believed I couldn't touch him. Since he stopped pretending, I decided there was no need for me to pretend either. Smiling faintly, I patted his cheek. You're still too young. Today, I'll show you exactly what I can do to you. As I spoke, I gestured toward the entrance. Several of my bodyguards had been standing in the corner ever since the event began. The moment they received the signal, they immediately walked over to my side. President Wang, what are you trying to do? Makoto finally sensed that something was wrong. Relax, I spoke calmly. You've just entered society, but that reckless hot-headed attitude of yours really needs fixing. Today, they'll teach you a lesson. Two bodyguards grabbed him by the arms from either side and started dragging him toward the exit. Throughout it all, my expression never changed. I merely tilted my head slightly, my gaze shifting away from him and settling on the champagne glass trembling in his hand. Wait, be careful not to spill the drink. At least let him finish it first. I smiled faintly. A bottle this expensive is probably something he'll never get the chance to taste again in his entire life. One of the bodyguards stepped forward, pried open Makoto's mouth, and forcibly poured the champagne down his throat. President Liu, save me. Makoto shouted desperately for help, but the bodyguards moved too quickly, so quickly that before anyone around us could even react, he had already been dragged outside. Chapter 3. Willow Liu's voice came from behind me. George, what happened? I just saw Makoto being dragged away. Nothing serious. I turned around and gently brushed the strands of hair off her shoulder. He said something he shouldn't have. I was just straightening him out a little. Honey, Makoto is still young. He just entered society. Why don't we give him another chance? Her gaze moved past me toward the direction where the bodyguards had left, and she was still trying to plead for him. I patted her hand reassuringly. Don't worry, nothing will happen. I know my limits. The party continued. The small incident from earlier was quickly forgotten, and no one was willing to ruin their mood over him. After the gathering ended, the night passed without a trace. The following evening, I sat by the window in my study, casually twirling a custom-made fountain pen in my hand. Outside the window was the quiet nightscape of the villa district, with the occasional distant barking of dogs drifting through the darkness. I was waiting. At exactly 11:17 p.m., the villa's front door was kicked open. Willow stormed into the study furiously, her high heels striking the wooden floor with heavy, sharp knocks. Her face was flushed with emotion, and her eyes were red too, as if she had just been crying. George. She stood in the middle of the study, her chest rising and falling violently as she demanded. Didn't you tell me you were only going to straighten him out a little? I set down the pen and leaned back in my chair, looking at her. From the very first day I met her, I had never seen her lose control like this. That's right, I replied calmly. I only straightened him out a little. Willow's lips trembled slightly. And by straightening him out, you mean knocking out 8 teeth and breaking 6 ribs? Say something. Seeing me sitting there coldly and silently, Willow's voice suddenly rose. You had people beat him into that state. He's lying in the hospital getting stitched up right now. The doctor said several of his ribs are broken, and all his front teeth are gone. George, when did you become like this? I've always been like this, I replied calmly. You just never saw it before. I was telling the truth. I had never been some honest, law-abiding gentleman. Otherwise, I never would have reached the position I hold today. She froze for a moment, as though all her strength had suddenly been drained away. Her voice softened involuntarily. He works for my company. Even if you were unhappy about something, couldn't you at least talk to me first? You beat someone without saying a word. That's way too far. I looked at her. In all our years of marriage, this was the first time I had ever seen such intense emotion directed at me in her eyes. It wasn't fear. It wasn't disappointment. It was anger. Anger born for another man. Let's get divorced, I said evenly. Willow's face changed instantly. She lifted her head and stared at me in disbelief. Are you insane? You want a divorce over something this small? I looked back at her. You think this is something small? Of course it is. Her voice was filled with frustration and anger. There's nothing between him and me. He's just a kid who recently graduated. What's wrong with me helping him out a little? You can't beat someone half to death just because of your own paranoia. And you definitely can't divorce me over baseless suspicions like this. I waited quietly until she finished speaking before responding. I know nothing has happened yet. If something had happened, you wouldn't be standing here completely unharmed right now. Willow's body stiffened instantly. The words completely unharmed slid down the back of her neck like ice, making her shiver despite her rage. But I don't wait until something happens before dealing with it. Cutting off danger before it begins, that's who I am. You, her lips trembled slightly. The overwhelming anger in her voice gradually faded away. In its place was a panic she herself hadn't even realized had surfaced. Can't you be reasonable? I already told you there's nothing between us. We've been together for so many years. Don't you trust me? I trust the person you used to be, I said quietly. But now, you've changed. Chapter 4. My voice was very soft, almost as if I were talking to myself. Her eyes reddened again. Taking a deep breath, she walked forward and braced both hands against the desk, leaning down to look directly into my eyes. George, I promise you, once he recovers, I'll transfer him away. I'll never contact him again after that. Is that enough? I pulled out a document. It was something I had specially prepared earlier that day, with her company's name printed clearly across the cover. She understood what it was after only one glance. Back when she first founded the company, she had signed an agreement with me, because the core resources and startup capital during the company's early stages had all come from me. We had agreed that I would hold a certain percentage of shares in her company, and now, I wanted her to transfer the remaining shares to me as well. I don't want verbal promises. I placed a pen beside the document. If you two ever have any further contact in the future, your entire company becomes mine. Willow stared at the agreement, then looked back at me. Deep down, she knew perfectly well that from a logical standpoint, this time, she was indeed in the wrong. If the situation were reversed, if there were a female assistant behaving that way around me, she wouldn't even dare imagine how furious she would be. At the end of the day, she knew she was the one standing on shaky ground. Sign it, and this matter ends here, I said calmly. No matter what happened later, I needed to secure the money in my hands first. She bit her lip softly and bent down to pick up the pen. Just before the tip touched the paper, she looked up at me once more, the corners of her eyes still red. George, I really do love you. Then sign it. I nodded slightly, urging her on. Lowering her head, she quickly signed her name in 2 swift strokes. I won't contact him again, she said as she set the pen down. You can trust me. After she left the study, I remained sitting in my chair without moving. I heard her footsteps go upstairs. Then came the soft sound of the bedroom door closing. The entire villa fell silent once more. My gaze settled on the signed share transfer agreement. Black words on white paper, clear signatures, definite dates. And yet, I felt no sense of relief whatsoever. I knew Willow too well. At her core, she was like a cat, someone who loved being gently pampered and emotionally soothed. And people like Makoto, with their sweet words, careful attentiveness, and humble, submissive attitude, happened to scratch exactly where she felt most comfortable. She truly hadn't lied to me. Signing the agreement today, she genuinely believed she could keep her promise. But once that young man appeared again, once he looked at her with those pitiful, wounded eyes again, how much of today's determination would still remain? I didn't dare gamble on it. Chapter 5. The days that followed seemed to return to how things used to be. Sometimes Willow would go to the hospital to pay Makoto's bills or bring him necessities. And every time, she reported it to me beforehand. She said that once he was discharged, she would fire him and cut all ties with him completely. I also had people keeping an eye on the situation the entire time, confirming that she was only delivering essentials and paying hospitalization fees. And so, a month passed. One noon at the company, I was preparing to take a short nap when my phone suddenly showed a new friend request. After I accepted it, the other person immediately sent over a photo. The background was clearly a hospital room. Makoto was wearing a patient gown, holding a bottle of red wine in his hand. Wong, didn't you say I'd never get to drink good wine again in my life? What about this one? Isn't it even better than yours? Heh. Looking at the photo of Makoto, his entire body wrapped in bandages, yet his face filled with smug satisfaction, I laughed again out of sheer anger. With injuries like his, he absolutely shouldn't have been drinking alcohol. This was nothing but blatant provocation. Was he really not afraid of dying? Looks like the previous lesson hadn't worked at all. I put away my phone and immediately called for my bodyguards before heading straight to the hospital. When we entered his private hospital room, Makoto didn't seem overly panicked upon seeing us. In fact, he almost looked as though he had been waiting for us to arrive. You came pretty fast, he said, but I'd advise you not to do anything reckless. President Liu went to handle the payment paperwork. She'll be back soon. You're being discharged today, aren't you? I sat down beside his hospital bed and continued casually. I came to pick you up. Then I asked calmly. What did the doctor say you need to be careful about after discharge? Seeing me speak so peacefully, almost like I was chatting with an old friend, Makoto looked confused. Today, Willow had come to handle his discharge procedures before sending him away to another city. He had spent half a year scheming his way into getting close to her. He couldn't bear to let all that effort go to waste, so he added George and deliberately sent that provocative photo, fully expecting George to come and beat him up again. That way, he could stay hospitalized for a few more days. For now, he had no better plan. Delaying things for a few extra days would at least buy him time to think of another way to stay close to Willow. But the fact that we came here to pick him up from the hospital, that was something he had never anticipated. Cough, cough. The doctor said I need proper rest and someone to take care of me. I should eat nutritious food to recover. And most importantly, my wounds can't touch water. If they get infected, it'll become troublesome. He had already returned to that arrogant, defiant attitude of his, rambling on and on about precautions as though he were hinting that I should hire him a caretaker and let him recuperate comfortably. But out of everything he said, I only heard one sentence. His wounds can't touch water. Oh, so your wounds can't touch water. I crooked a finger lightly, and the bodyguards behind me immediately surrounded the bed. Then throw him into the sea. Makoto froze for a second before screaming for help. One of the bodyguards reacted quickly, pulling off his sock and stuffing it into Makoto's mouth before tying him up like a hog and dragging him into the car. Meanwhile, I remained seated there, waiting for Willow to return. Not long afterward, Willow came back holding the hospital paperwork. Everything's done, we can go. The moment she pushed the door open and saw me sitting there alone, her expression changed instantly as she looked around the empty room. Ma, where is he? Who? Makoto. Her voice tightened anxiously. Oh. I stood up with my coat draped over my arm and said, him? After he got discharged from the hospital, I figured I'd help wash away his bad luck. So I had someone take him to the seaside. Chapter 6. Willow's body trembled violently. She stared at me in disbelief, as though she were looking at someone she had never known before. Her lips parted, but the words caught in her throat. After a long moment, she finally forced them out. Say that again. I threw him into the sea. Let him soak a little. She staggered backward. When the doctor explained the discharge precautions earlier, she had been there too. She knew perfectly well that this could kill him. Honey, stop joking around. He'll die like this. I said nothing. George. She rushed forward and grabbed my sleeve tightly. Tell me where you sent him. You've lost your mind. That's a human life. I lowered my eyes to look at the fingers clutching my sleeve so tightly. She was truly panicking. Not the kind of panic someone feels because an unimportant subordinate went missing. No. This was the kind where the body reacted before the brain could even think. The desperate panic of wanting to drag someone out of danger no matter the cost, no matter the situation. Seeing that I still refused to speak, she became even more frantic. Tell me where he is. Whatever conditions you have, I'll agree to them. I lifted my eyes and looked at her. At that moment, I suddenly realized she was no longer the girl who once had only me in her heart and eyes. Nor was she the person who used to video call me after a single day apart just to say she missed me. Divorce. Willow froze. She had never once imagined divorce, but the moment she thought about a human life potentially disappearing forever, hesitation appeared in her eyes. You can take your time thinking about it, I said calmly, but from here to the seaside, it's only a little over an hour away. If you're too late. Seeing her wavering, I deliberately left the sentence unfinished. Fine. I'll sign. Have the lawyer send the papers over. I'll sign them right now. I had already prepared everything. From my bag, I pulled out a brown document envelope. Inside was a divorce agreement that had already been drafted. Very simple. Only 2 pages. I spread the documents across the nearby counter and pushed them, along with a pen, toward her. She froze briefly before picking up the agreement. She flipped through it quickly, barely glancing at the contents before turning directly to the final page and locating the signature line. Then she signed her name. I sent her a location pin and said calmly, "You'd better hurry. If you're too late, I can't guarantee he'll still be alive when you get there." She lowered her head to glance at the screen, grabbed her bag, and turned to leave immediately. Her high heels struck the floor in a rapid series of sharp echoes. I walked out of the hall and stood on the terrace. The night wind carried the cold, fishy scent unique to the river. The water in the distance was pitch black, with only the city lights from the opposite shore scattering across the surface like shattered gold. I took out my phone and made a call. "She's on her way." On the other end came a voice broken apart by the sound of sea wind. "Understood, President Wang." The seawater in April was still freezing cold. Before Willow arrived, Makoto was probably going to have a very miserable time. Chapter 7. According to the report I later received, when Makoto was finally pulled out of the sea, he was already unconscious. His entire body was soaked and freezing cold, his lips purple, with a wound at the corner of his forehead still bleeding. Willow's hands trembled as she reached out to check his breathing. Weak, intermittent, But he was still alive. The bastard really did have incredible luck. The ambulance arrived quickly. The doctor performed emergency treatment on site and said that although he hadn't been submerged for very long, he had suffered a head injury. His condition wasn't optimistic, and he needed to be transferred to the ICU immediately. Makoto remained unconscious for 2 days. During those 2 days, Willow barely left the hospital. At 5 in the morning on the 3rd day, the steady beeping of the heart monitor suddenly quickened twice. Willow jolted awake from her light sleep and saw that the swollen eyes on the hospital bed had opened into narrow slits. Staring at her, Makoto had woken up. It took him quite a while for his vision to focus properly. After recognizing her, he slowly lifted the one hand he could still move and lightly touched the back of the hand she had resting beside the bed. President Liu. His voice sounded like a broken bellows leaking air. Have you been here the whole time? Willow didn't answer. She merely reached out and pressed the nurse call button. The doctors came in and performed a series of examinations, eventually confirming that he was no longer in life-threatening danger, though he still needed continued observation. After the doctors left, Makoto turned to look at her again with those damp, vulnerable eyes. Inside them were fear, weakness, relief from surviving death, and hidden beneath it all, a faint trace of smug satisfaction. She hadn't left. Not only had she dragged him back from the sea, she had stayed by his bedside for 2 entire days and nights. What did that mean? It meant she valued him more than anything else, more than her own husband. He had gambled correctly. He realized he couldn't breathe deeply. It felt as though something heavy were pressing against his lungs, and yet he still couldn't help smiling. The movement pulled painfully at the injuries in his chest, triggering a violent coughing fit. He coughed so hard that his entire upper body shook. Tears streamed from the corners of his eyes, and even the medical equipment beside the bed let out several sharp warning beeps. Willow hurriedly poured him a cup of warm water and handed it over. What are you laughing at? You're already in this condition and you're still laughing. Taking the cup from her, he smiled weakly. I just think. He coughed once, his voice hoarse and fragile. Being able to see you again is really nice, I thought. I thought I'd never see you again for the rest of my life. Willow lowered her eyes and used a tissue to wipe away the moisture on his face. Stop talking. Lie down and rest. President Liu. He called her obediently. Gone was his usual playful attitude. His tone sounded so sincere it bordered on humble. You saved my life. Willow remained silent. You know, he said softly while staring at the ceiling, his voice carrying the bitterness of painful memories. I grew up without parents. I was raised by relatives. I paid for my own education by working part-time jobs. And after I started working, I've always been alone. He turned to look at her again, a thin layer of moisture covering his eyes. You're the first person who has ever genuinely treated me well. Slowly, he reached out and grabbed Willow's wrist. That hand was still trembling. The hand of someone who had just crawled back from death itself, his fingers icy cold, yet his palm burning hot. President Liu. His voice dropped to barely more than a whisper. Tonight, can you stay? Chapter 8. Willow stared at the hand gripping her wrist and remained silent for a long time. The monitor beside the bed blinked with soft green lights. Outside in the hallway came the sound of a nurse pushing a cart past the room. At last, she slowly pulled her hand back. It's good that you woke up, she said calmly. Now that you're awake, I can finally stop worrying. I should go home too. Makoto froze. She stood up, pushed the chair neatly back into place, and moved the cup of warm water slightly closer to the bed so he could reach it more easily. Her movements were calm and methodical, like someone finishing the final steps of a routine task. Now that I know you're all right, I can relax. I'll hire a caretaker for you. When you're discharged, I'll give you a sum of money. Then you should leave this city. Makoto abruptly pushed himself halfway upright and shouted. No. His eyes instantly reddened. Tears came flooding out immediately. This time, it wasn't an act. It was fury. It was unwillingness. He had narrowly escaped death twice. How could he possibly let go right before the final step? No, impossible. You can't leave. Please listen to me. From the very first day I saw you, I knew you were my entire world. I'm willing to do anything for you. I don't care about getting beaten or almost drowning to death. I just want to stay by your side, even if it's only as some insignificant employee. In the past, all it took was for his eyes to redden and for him to say a few words like this, and Willow's heart would soften. But today was different. She looked down at the young man sprawled weakly across the hospital bed, crying desperately while staring at her with pleading eyes. What rose inside her wasn't pity. It was an indescribable irritation. He was fine now, but how was she supposed to go home and ask for George's forgiveness? Besides, the company already belonged to George now anyway. From now on, she would simply stay home, be a good wife, raise children, and never involve herself in these matters again. Makoto's desperate confession continued. His voice grew louder and louder, filled with the hysterical recklessness of someone smashing the last fragile thing they still had left. But she didn't hear a single word anymore. She couldn't lose George. This wasn't a decision made after carefully weighing pros and cons. It was simply the answer already rooted deep inside her heart. Once she made up her mind, she stopped hesitating. Focus on recovering properly. After leaving behind those final words, she pushed open the hospital room door and walked away without ever looking back. The moment the door closed behind her, Makoto's crying stopped instantly. He sat silently on the hospital bed for a very long time before finally pulling the 4 needle from the back of his hand. A string of blood droplets followed the needle out. He lowered his head, glanced at them expressionlessly, and wiped the blood onto the bedsheet. 2 months. He had exhausted every bit of effort he had. Those breakfasts and coffees. Those late-night overtime rides home. Those carefully staged, coincidental meetings in the lobby. The night she casually mentioned craving crawfish at 2 in the morning. He ran through 6 different restaurants buying 6 pounds of crawfish in different flavors. For 2 entire months, he memorized every look in her eyes, every expression, every careless passing remark. Then during their next meeting, he would casually bring those details up again, creating the illusion that he understood her perfectly. In just 2 months, he had elevated himself from a nobody into someone others described as. Seeing him is basically the same as seeing President Liu herself. And now he was covered in injuries, had nearly died twice, and she was telling him never to see her again. Slowly, with great difficulty, he turned his head toward the window. The sky outside was already beginning to brighten with the pale white glow of dawn. He stared at the scenery outside while slowly clenching the blood-stained bedsheet tightly in his fist, so tightly that his knuckles cracked audibly. He had paid an enormous price, and gained nothing. No, he hadn't lost yet. George, I'll make you pay for this. Willow, I'll take back everything I deserve from you. Chapter 9. On the drive home, Willow played an old song she and George used to listen to years ago. Her fingertips tapped lightly against the steering wheel as she tried to force the smell of hospital disinfectant out of her mind. She wanted to see George as soon as possible. She wanted to tell him, "I'm sorry. This time, I truly understand now." She wanted to tell him that all the foolish mistakes she made during those past 6 months were real, and she accepted responsibility for them. That from now on, that man would never appear in their lives again. She pressed George's speed dial shortcut on her phone. Busy tone. She tried again. Still busy. The wrought iron gates of the villa stood silently beneath the morning sunlight. She drove toward the sensor area and stopped for 3 seconds. The gates that used to open automatically the moment she got within 5 meters now remained completely motionless. She honked the horn. No one came. So she got out of the car, walked to the intercom, and pressed the button 3 times. Finally, a voice came through. It was the old butler. "Walter." "Miss Liu." Walter's voice sounded troubled. "Miss Liu." Willow slapped the iron gate in disbelief. She had only been gone a few days, yet the butler's form of address had already changed from Madam to Miss Liu. "Hurry and open the gate. Let me in." Walter handed her a document envelope. Willow took it and opened it. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a finalized divorce certificate. The second was the company transfer agreement, stamped with her own company's official seal, already legally effective. "Walter, what does this mean?" She heard her own voice trembling. "Ma'am," the old butler avoided looking directly into her eyes. "Sir gave instructions already. You are now considered a visitor, and visitors are not allowed to enter freely." "Visitor?" Willow frowned and shouted. "Who are you calling a visitor? This is my home." She shoved Walter aside and rushed toward the iron gates, gripping the cold bars with both hands and shaking them desperately. The gates didn't move even slightly. The metal decorations dug painfully into her palms. "George, come out. Let me in." "George." Inside the courtyard, the automatic sprinkler system was spraying water. The curtains over the distant floor-to-ceiling windows remained tightly shut and perfectly still. The master bedroom window upstairs was closed. That was the room where she and I had slept together for 7 years. The sound of her pounding against the iron gates echoed throughout the quiet villa district. Walter stood silently in front of her. He said. Walter hesitated briefly. "Sir asked me to inform you that the share transfer agreement has already taken effect. The company is now under his control. I don't want the company anymore." Willow turned around, tears finally spilling from her eyes. "I want him. Go tell him I want to see him. I don't want anything else anymore. Just ask him to come out and see me once." "Madam," Walter sighed softly. "Sir already said he won't see you. You should go back. If you continue annoying him, your situation will only become even worse." Willow slowly lowered the hand she had been using to pound against the gate. Her palms were already red. She stood there staring into the estate, the entire mansion bathed in the soft light of early morning. Like a dream she would never be able to return to again. She remained standing outside the gates for a very long time. In the end, she still left in lonely silence. That afternoon, I received a call at my office. It came from the company reception desk. The background on the other end was filled with chaotic shouting and noisy commotion. "President Wang," the receptionist said anxiously, sounding panicked. "There's a man causing a huge scene in the lobby. He's saying the company owes him wages. And he says if he doesn't see President Liu, he refuses to leave. What should we do? Have security bring him to my office. It seemed Makoto still didn't know that Willow's company now belonged to me. Chapter 10. 15 minutes later, Makoto was dragged into my office by 2 security guards. The moment he entered, he shook them off and straightened the collar they had pulled crooked. Even after being shoved forward, he still turned around to snap. Let go. I can walk by myself. He limped forward 2 steps. Bandages were still wrapped around his head, and the fresh scab at the corner of his forehead peeked out beneath the gauze. One side of his cheekbone was bruised purple-blue, and he still walked with a slight limp, but his arrogance remained completely intact. The moment he reached my desk, he slammed a hand down onto it. George, what the hell are you doing here? Where's Willow? Tell her to come see me. And where's my salary? You still haven't paid me for last month. I glanced up at him once before lowering my head and continuing to read my documents. I'm telling you, if you don't pay the wages you owe me today, I'll expose you the moment I walk out that door. A black-hearted capitalist refusing to pay employees their hard-earned money. Your massive company can't even afford $8,000 a month. He limped over to the sofa and threw himself heavily into it, crossing one leg over the other while leaning back and staring at the ceiling arrogantly. I ignored him. I was waiting for an investigation report. I had personally ordered his salary frozen. After spending several months as Willow's assistant, there was no way she hadn't given him gifts and benefits. And people like him, weren't they only after money? He had definitely taken advantage of the situation plenty of times, and I intended to make him spit every last cent back out. My money could be wasted or thrown into the ocean for all I cared, but I would never let trash like him profit from it. 3 knocks sounded at the door. My assistant entered and placed a folder on my desk. I opened it. The report was thin, only a single page. At first, my expression didn't change, but by the time I reached the 3rd line, my brows slowly furrowed. Noticing the shift in my expression, Makoto curled his lips into a mocking smile. Investigating me? President Wang, I think you're looking in the wrong direction. I finished reading the page and closed the folder. During his 6 months at the company, he had earned $4,000 a month during the first 2 months of internship. After becoming a full employee, his salary rose to $8,000. Not a cent more. He worked diligently, never late, never left early, no customer complaints, no embezzlement, no kickbacks. He hadn't even accepted a single personal gift from Willow. Judging purely from the report, he was actually an exceptionally good employee. I raised my eyes and looked at the young man sitting across from me, his head wrapped in bandages, one leg still injured, yet his face full of arrogant confidence. What the fuck do you actually want? I asked. There was no anger in my voice, only genuine curiosity. And don't give me that true love bullshit. He lounged on the sofa with his legs crossed, tilting his head while silently chewing over my words several times. Then he clicked his tongue and shot me a disdainful glance. You think I'm like everyone else? Taking a few gifts and skimming a little cash is enough to satisfy me. He lowered his leg and leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. That's called building a persona. Do you understand? The capable, obedient, incorruptible young employee persona. In her eyes, I had to be the idealistic subordinate, clean, talented, content with poverty. You think accepting gifts is difficult? He sneered. Refusing them is the hard part. My eyes narrowed slowly. He raised a bandaged hand and tapped his temple with one finger. What I want is everything. You're everything. I don't want gifts. I don't want kickbacks. I only want her. Once I win her over, everything you own, including the chair you're sitting in right now, will belong to me sooner or later. He looked directly at me, eyes burning with naked ambition. I don't want scraps. I want all of it. Chapter 11. He finally stopped pretending completely. That bright smile, that humble attitude, that perfectly measured sense of propriety. All of it had been an act from the very beginning. From start to finish, what he wanted was never merely a job opportunity. You almost lost your life twice, I said while leaning back against my chair. So why are you still willing to come here? Aren't you afraid of dying? He froze briefly, then suddenly burst into loud laughter. He laughed so hard that the wound at his temple split open again, fresh blood seeping out. Yet he didn't care. He casually wiped the blood away with his sleeve and laughed even harder. His laughter echoed sharply through the empty office. As he laughed, his expression gradually twisted. A disturbing light burst forth from his eyes. It wasn't madness. It was the complete release of something suppressed to its absolute limit. Afraid of dying. He stopped laughing and leaned forward slightly, gritting out each word. Compared to death, I'm far more afraid of being poor. My life was worthless from the moment I was born. So what's there to cherish about something worthless? You take risks. You change your fate. Some people don't even get the chance to gamble. He raised a finger and pointed toward the doorway. Willow is my opportunity. She's the highest branch I'll ever be able to climb in this lifetime. So risking my life for it, what's so strange about that? I looked at his clenched face and slowly understood. This man had never been after money from the very start. He was after the entire fortune. What he wanted wasn't salary, kickbacks, or a few luxury gifts. He wanted to use Willow to leap across social classes entirely, and along that path, emotions were merely tools. Morality was merely a burden. Even Willow herself was nothing more than a bridge leading toward his goal. The person he chose was never specifically Willow. It could have been anyone capable of elevating his status. "Where's Willow?" he suddenly asked. His voice changed, carrying unwillingness and the edge of tears. "Make her come see me. I don't believe she could really be this heartless. She can't just decide never to see me again. When I was unconscious, she stayed beside me for 2 days and nights. I could tell she cared about me. Make her come out. If she abandons me now, then I really have nowhere left to go." I smiled faintly. "You won't be seeing her again," I said in the same calm tone as always, "but I can point you toward another path." He rubbed his reddened eyes and stared at me warily. What path?" "I happen to have a route in Southeast Asia." I casually twirled the pen on my desk while speaking slowly and deliberately. Makoto's pupils contracted violently. His entire body jerked upright from the sofa like he'd been electrocuted, his face instantly turning deathly pale. "Southeast Asia." His voice trembled. "You mean the kind where the risks are high, but the profits are even higher?" I raised an eyebrow slightly. "Exactly. Great fortunes come from great risks." No, I'm not going." He stumbled backward a step, his voice cracking in panic. "Even if you beat me to death, I'm not going there. If I die, I'll die here. Don't even think about sending me to a place like that. That's not really your decision anymore." I leaned back in my chair and shook my head slowly. Then I clapped my hands once. Four bodyguards dressed in black immediately pushed open the office door and entered without a word. Two of them stepped forward at once and twisted his arms behind his back with practiced efficiency. The movements were swift and clean. He didn't even have time to react. "You can't. Let go of me. You have no right." I waved my hand lightly. One of the bodyguards covered his mouth, forcing the rest of his struggles down into muffled resistance. As they dragged him toward the doorway, his legs kicked desperately against the hallway floor. The bandages around his head unraveled, leaving a long streak of blood behind him. His screams became muffled whimpers trapped between the guard's fingers. The elevator doors opened. For 3 final seconds, his voice echoed through the elevator shaft. Then the heavy metal doors slammed shut, cutting the sound off completely. At last, the office became quiet again. I sat there alone for a while. Everything had finally been resolved, and for the first time in a long while, I felt completely relaxed. Chapter 12. By the time autumn ended, the city had taken on a different face. Most of the parasol tree leaves had already fallen, and the air was permanently filled with a dry, chilly sharpness. I never deliberately tried to learn about Willow's situation afterward, but news about her still found its way to my ears one way or another. Some people said she was working as a cashier at a supermarket chain. Others said she had rented a tiny 40-square-meter apartment in an old residential building on the west side of the city. She still hadn't given up on seeing me. She kept asking mutual friends to pass messages along, insisting that she had never betrayed me. One day, when I happened to have free time, I went to the supermarket where she worked. She was restocking bottles of laundry detergent onto the shelves. She wore a red and white striped employee vest and an old pair of white canvas shoes. Her hair was casually tied behind her head, with several loose strands sticking to her temples from sweat. She looked much thinner than I remembered. Her cheekbones had become more defined, and her jawline sharper. Then she turned around and saw me. She froze instantly. The bottle of detergent slipped from her hands and hit the shelf with a dull thud. Her lips moved slightly, as though she wanted to call my name, but no sound came out. I walked past her and said quietly, "Stop trying to contact me, and stop making our friends pass messages to me. You're putting them in a difficult position." "Why?" Willow's voice broke as she began crying. Her eyes turned red as she instinctively reached out toward my arm, but stopped just before touching me. "I never betrayed you. You know that. You never betrayed me." I looked at her calmly. "So as long as you didn't sleep with him, that means you're innocent. Can you honestly say your feelings never changed? If that idiot hadn't provoked me and I hadn't discovered everything early enough, can you really say you would have been able to resist what came next?" "I can, but I don't believe you." I interrupted her quietly. "I'll never trust a woman whose heart has already changed." Then I looked at her one last time. "Honestly, I think your life right now is fine. I won't target you anymore, but I won't help you either." After saying that, I turned around, ignoring the heartbroken sobs echoing behind me. I walked away without ever looking back. From that moment on, I never heard another thing about her again. It was as though she had suddenly vanished completely from my world. But maybe that was for the best. People have to learn how to move forward. This was the road we chose ourselves, and no matter what happens, we can only keep walking forward.